Right, welcome to day 3. So this is like your press assistance day. So you've got an axle press, you've got a no back supported behind the neck press, and I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about shoulders and external rotation, which is what you need lots of to get your bar behind the back of the neck. Now typically, because of the amount of pressing that's involved in strongman, powerlifting, you tend to find shoulders are a really common problem area. And it's not just the issues around the actual tendons that have become inflamed, it's also the positional changes that take place. So when you're looking in the mirror, if you find that your shoulders look asymmetrical, and that's a change in the posture, that's a change in that alignment, then the chances are you've developed something called scapular dyskinesis. And scapular dyskinesis simply means that your shoulder blade's moving differently. So ordinarily, when we go into a movement called abduction, your shoulder should stay depressed up to about 30 degrees. So there should be no movement in your scapula up to about that point. Then from that point upwards, we have a 2-to-1 ratio of humeral movements, which is that bone there, to scapular movements until we get to 180 degrees of shoulder abduction. So what happens when you get a shoulder injury is the shoulder goes into a capsular pattern, the shoulder comes forwards, so the head of the humerus, head of the top of your arm, sits at the front of the joint, and what you find is that as soon as you initiate that movement out to the side, you start to use your traps kick in very quickly. Now underneath this bone here, which is called the acromion process, which is the top part of your scapula, you have a tendon called supraspinatus. Because the shoulder's up and the space between that tendon and the bone that sits above it is reduced, when you get to here, you start to get shoulder pain. Now, if you're in that category, I would say you're not local to Batley, which is between Dewsbury and Bradford, so you can't come and pay me a visit. I would encourage you to get yourself booked in for an online consultation, because that is likely to be made worse by things like behind the neck press. You'll find that because your external rotation is limited by the position of your humeral head, you're going to find that that's going to start to cause you increasing amounts of problems as you start to get into the position where you're behind the neck pressing. Right, so this is your posterior shoulder capsule stretch mobilisation. Now, ordinarily I'd use a kettlebell, but my lightest kettlebell is 32 kilos, and that's a little bit too much to be able to show you this with any good strict technique. And what I'm interested in doing on this particular video is showing you how to do it so that when you come to loading it up with a heavier kettlebell, you've actually got this kind of mechanics of the movement itself. So kettlebell would be resting onto the forearm, onto the back of your forearm. Now you need a heavy enough kettlebell that it forces your shoulder back onto the floor behind you. And we talked about that scapular dyskinesis when we said the shoulder sat forwards. So you can hold that position and that will do absolutely nothing for the shoulder. So let the weight of the kettlebell sink your shoulder, the humeral head, back into the back of the shoulder joint. Then what we're going to do from here is we're going to push up through the scapula, externally rotate at the top, and then relax down again. So push up, external rotation, relax back down again. So it's a protraction from the shoulder rather than a push with the arm. Then relax each time resetting. So you've got to make sure that every time you finish that rep, the head of the humerus, the head of the arm bone, pushes right back. You feel some contact from the head of the humerus onto the floor before you start your next repetition again. Now this is going to be a great one to improve the external rotation of your shoulder. This is the starting point. There is piece number 2 after this. So piece number 2 of that 2-part exercise is now using a band to pull the humeral head down. So the first exercise we did with the kettlebell was about pushing the humeral head posteriorly. This is now taking it in what we call, in the clinical world, a longitudinal caudad direction, but to your eye, it's pulling it down. Now the first thing to remember, this green band, this is what you're applying the resistance with. I'm stood on the other end, and we're going to make sure that we're not over the bone that sits on top of the humeral head, on top of the scapula. So feel for the bony bit, it's there. Make sure the band is more onto your arm than it is onto the top of the shoulder. So that's the first key piece of information. Then from there, we should be able to then go back into external rotation, clear out the corners of the joints. So you've opened up the back of the joint with your kettlebell, posterior joint capsule mobilisation. We're now using a banded external rotation. And again, we're really trying to think about getting those arms back as far as we can. This isn't just about passively moving it to a range where you think, well, that's as far as it goes. This is about firing up the external rotators at the back of the shoulder and using them to pull your arm back into position. So I feel like I'm about 6 months old in my baby walker, whatever they call those things that are your Now this is a dead hang with a special emphasis on your thoracic spine. So squat racks, you can do these from any sort of hanging position. So the green band's tied around the top, the green band around the back is in about the T7 region, which is approximately where your bra strap sits at the weekend. And we're going to use that because that's the hinge point for your back. So when you're pressing overhead, that's the point where you start to create your arch from. It's not from the lower back. You can create arch from your lower back and you'll just end up pissing off the joints down there. So we need to be thinking about creating an arch from the midpoint of your thoracic spine. If you imagine a stone bridge, and the central stone in that stone bridge, the keystone, which holds the weight between the left and the right side of the bridge, T7 functions like your keystone. So it's one of the most important segments in your thoracic spine. So green band, that's creating an extension moment in my thoracic spine. I'm going to grab onto the bar and then I'm going to keep a little bit of tension on my feet. So I'm not letting myself hang completely. I'm just keeping a little bit of contact with my feet on the floor, and I'm going to spend 30 to 60 seconds in this position. You might want to try and play around with a different grip. That actually feels a little bit better for me, but it might be better the other way for you, because remember all our individual biomechanics. And again, 30 to 60 seconds in that other position if you find it more comfortable. So that is your thoracic spine banded, dead hang, and that's your final piece.